Morning all. Let's have a look at the really interesting game between Vishy Anand and Hikaru Nakamura in round 8 of the London Classic. Vishy kicked off with e4 and Nakamura played the fighting Sicilian defence. After knight f3 d6 we see the open Sicilian with d4. After knight takes d4 we see knight f6. Knight c3, Najdorf territory a6. Very powerful move, very popular. Some describe it as a high-class waiting move, preventing white using b5. Later, black can look forward to b5 and bishop b7 if opportunity arises. White plays in this position slightly unusual off-the-beat track move h3. Okay, and Nakamura reacts energetically with e5. Kicking the knight. After knight de2, perhaps he's not too keen on white playing g4 here, which could explain this next move, h5. It's quite a radical way of stopping g4. Okay, but the downside is the g5 square. Surely a piece can land now, for example the bishop on g5, without it being interrupted with h6, and it's exactly what happened, bishop g5. Okay, this structure looks a bit like a Sveshnikov now, and like a Sveshnikov, white's control of d5 might be critical here. Bishop e6 is played, and now not even waiting for a move like h6, which is not possible anyway, Vishy actually voluntarily takes on f6 here, believe it or not. Perhaps one thought is that black is going to play bishop e7, and this is the time to take on f6 to try and weaken d5 a little bit and get that queen as a tempo gainer maybe. So bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and the queen is a tempo gain with knight d5 now. The queen just goes all the way back here to d8. Perhaps queen g5 isn't particularly useful in that position, especially in light of knight c7 check. So the queen has to go all the way back to protect c7. And now protecting that d5 knight, reinforcing it with the other knight. So white's control of d5 is evident. And it would be nice in a second part of this game to run through a reference check. How many games have had this continuation? It seems a rare bird continuation indeed. Okay, so knight d7, and we see bishop c4, reinforcing d5 control. g6. Now a4, trying to prevent black from b5, which could be a freeing maneuver at some point soon. Bishop going to h6 now, going on this diagonal is very interesting and creative. Another point of h5, it's affording this kind of idea, bishop being more shielded. We see a5 from white now, trying to lock down black's queen side. Rook c8, that bishop just moves back. Now both sides castle. So after this initial opening phase, it's clear white has a good grip on the d5 square, and black now might be interested in taking this pawn as a potential threat. Here it would seem to fail. If taking this pawn there'll be a check, which is pretty nasty. So getting rid of some of these possibilities, king g7. So potentially now queen a5 might actually be on. How is the a5 pawn protected here? Is white going to spend another move? Is it really on indeed? Maybe we should check that out in the second pass, but it seems to be that white's reacting to the a5 pawn now being a bit looser by playing b4 and not minding the c3 square and the c file in general being a bit weaker. Naka now plays rook c6, preparing maybe to double at some point, but not here because of knight e7. That knight's pretty good on d5, of course, if black misplays this position. We see after queen d3 now, Okay, this is an all-purpose strengthening move, and maybe even b5 is supported later. For the moment, Naka plays queen g5, and here on a b5 strike, you might imagine actually, well, the bishop's on h3 here. It's potentially quite dangerous, but black is also threatening, perhaps, just queen d2, putting pressure on white's position. And you can imagine a bishop coming to d2 would be skewering quite a few pieces and pawns, and perhaps it's this possibility of queen d2 here that white reacts to that with rook fd1, not just simply strengthening d5 but making sure black can't use d2. For the moment, bishop h3 is not possible. It's protected by the queen. So we see now rook fc8, and now the move bishop b3, holding up c2. So to any bishop takes d5, there's knight takes d5 now without losing c2 to rook takes c2. So reinforcement is the name of the game for the moment for white. Really reinforcing all the squares, battening down the hatches. But black aggressively tries to undermine the white position with f5 in here, this position. With f5, this pressure on e4, it might be contributed with queen h4 next, with pressure along this row. White now actually takes on f5, and after g takes f5, it might be possible, and we need to check this out, that b5 is a potentially useful idea. But here Vishy played knight e2. Another potentially useful and interesting idea to check out is f4. So we'll check these out in the second pass. We'll just go with the game continuation here, which was knight e2. And now we see the aggressive move f4 being played, and this is going to lead now to a very interesting continuation. Vishy plays here knight d takes f4, so there's a threat now if bishop takes e6 if the simple move e takes f4 is played. Bishop takes e6. Okay, but after bishop takes b3, white doesn't simply recapture with c takes. Well, he'll be losing that piece if c takes. He plays, actually, this is the idea, h4, to try and distract the queen away from g6. For example, if queen e7, then queen g6, and that's pretty devastating for black. So the queen's got to remain protecting g6 here for the moment. And queen g4 is therefore played. f3 now is played attacking the queen again. So this is a completely forcing line, it seems. Bishop takes c2 attacking white's queen here. So now, where can the white queen go safely? Because it would be nice to be able to play knight e6 check, forking. Earlier it would have been nice to play knight e6 check, pardon me, the situation's changed radically here. That there was a latent tactic for knight e6 check, but that's gone now after queen g4. So f3 is more simple than that. f3 simply seems to trap the queen, actually. But there is h4, but then queen g6, so the queen's got to remain on g4 again to protect g6. Okay, so after bishop takes c2, if the queen is going away from g6, then queen takes h4 then should be possible, and there's no knight e6 check or anything. So basically, white's next move is now forced. He has to actually take the queen. Black takes white's queen, and now the knight gets out of the way, taking a pawn with check. Okay, king g8, and we have a very interesting position emerging after rook takes d3. So the situation now is white has an extra pawn technically, but these pawns are all a little bit weak, especially to rook c4. Black played here now the move bishop f8, so the rook's now free to move without dropping d6. White now logically plays the move king h2. The king is going to get involved perhaps to help g4, and doesn't mind actually rook c4 here, which is played. So the king comes to help g4. Black snaps up the pawn, so at the moment we have pawn material equality. Rook f3 is played, and there's a potentially dangerous infiltration point if the rook's double, which is a very, very interesting point of the game here after rook c2. You might think that the only possible move here for white is to do something about this knight, but we'll see in the second pass in this position there's a remarkable, fantastically remarkable resource actually in this position, just ignoring the knight on e2, to be able to play rook a f1. So after taking rook f7, and it starts to get very dangerous after rook f7, even though black has won a piece, because there's threats. For example, well, if the knight moves, there's rook takes f8. There's quite a lot of threats to consider, but we'll check that out in the second pass. In the game, knight c3 is played, e4, pardon me, e4, now the rook goes to g3, tucking itself on g3, rook d2, and with rook e1 it looks as though, well, the idea of rook d2 was to try and get these pawns going. After d5 these pawns are looking quite dangerous. If black can keep this centre, the pieces could gain in quality. So here Vishy is interested in destroying black's centre. He plays actually the move knight f4, and it initially looks as though, hang on, what about this dangerous skewer? Well, maybe the problem is knight takes d5 is it's attacking the rook just in time. Knight f4 attacking d5, that's quite dangerous, and that's parried, it seems, with rook bd4. But now a very interesting decision for material imbalances. Vishy smashes black's centre, offering two pieces for the rook with knight c takes d5. Okay, very interesting. So in this position we need to check out various things in the second pass still. Perhaps bishop d6 looks quite good, for example, creating a pin, it seems, on the knight. But okay, the move rook takes d5 was played, simpler, getting two pieces for the rook, but black's centre vanishing. But now, after rook takes a5, what about these two connected passed pawns? Very, very dangerous, potentially. But what about white's passed pawns? We have a very dangerous scenario here for both sides, in fact. g5 now for white. And Naka plays rook a3. And there's a clear invitation for white to just take the rook here, which might indeed be very dangerous, or even close to winning, potentially, but we'll check that out in the second pass. Vishy plays actually rook e8 here, inviting black to take on a3 after pinning that bishop on g3, and black does take on g3, and we see b5. Are these pawns really, really dangerous in this scenario? Rook d8 is played, the knight moves, rook b8 keeping the pawn in check, or is it? Yes, it is, because b4 takes, there's no discovered check because rook takes e4, so b4 seems to be ruled out, or at least intuitively it seems ruled out. Black gets out of the way of the pin now with king f7, But we see the tactical g6, just trying to take the king away from the protection of f8. Was this a blunder, king f7? King g7. And then we see king g4, getting away from any knight checks, preparing h5. This is starting to look dangerous for both sides. b4 is played now in this position. So one question, can white not just take on b4 here? But then maybe the g6 pawn will drop. So king takes g6. White is interested in also maintaining his pawns, not just wiping out these pawns. So he plays h5, maintaining his dangerous pawn on g6. And black maintains his dangerous b pawn with b3. So king f5, we're working up a really dangerous position now, indeed, for both sides. Bishop d6, attacking the rook. The rook now goes to b4. Okay. And now it looks as though, well, the only thing stopping this pawn from queening is this rook. If we can drag this rook away. So this next move, a5, seems to tick that box. Rook b6. And now offering even the bishop. Hikaru plays a4. These pawns are getting really, really dangerous, surely. The remarkable thing now is that the bishop is indeed taken in any case, flying in the face of black's apparent resourcefulness. So b2, rook goes back. a3 is now played. And it's getting mighty dangerous, surely, because a2 is now on the cards, queening one of the pawns. We see now king g5, introducing some threats like h6, which can be really dangerous with rook b8. So the knight now gets the king away from g5 with knight e4. The king steps to f4 here. Also f5 is an interesting thing to consider as well. It's getting really hair-raising now after a2. You might think, isn't this over because black's queening? Well, we see check, king f8, and in this position white getting as much material as possible and letting black queen with rook takes b2, because the king's going to be able to take the knight after the rook gets out of the way. So we see black queening now, and it's not all over because white has these dangerous pawns. So we see check, and king takes e4 here. Okay. And in this position, it is believed, well, we'll check in the second pass, but Hikaru's move might not be optimal. He plays actually queen e1 check. In the second pass we need to check out queen a4 check as well. But queen e1 check was played in the game, and simply this allows the king to get near to the pawns. The key issue of this position is if black can forcibly use the queen to win this rook, and this move queen e1 check might not be satisfying that fundamental criteria. Can the rook be proven to be really loose here? After king f3 we see check, 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 and really that criteria has not been satisfied here, that the rook seems unwinnable. And in fact here white has his own latent threats if the checks are not maintained in this position. And we'll see that now, because here actually both players, they agreed to a draw here. The queen by itself cannot win this position, especially in light of these threats like rook b7 and g7, and we'll check that out here. So they agreed to draw here, and let's just turn on the engine here. It's 0, 0, 0. If king h4, what can black do to make progress here? Let's go with, say, king f6. We can throw in a check like this, check, and go back. If the king's not allowed to participate and the rook's safe enough, then this is a big problem. If we go check here, there's either king h3 or king g5. Both of them will do. The rook seems to be safe enough here. And it's like a draw by repetition. So, okay. Let's go back in this game, very complicated game, and check it out. Okay, so Hikaru played the Sicilian defence, and for a while we just thought we were going to see a normal Najdorf, Sicilian Najdorf game. Now let's move h3. Let's actually do a reference check on those interested in the slightly unusual move h3. So I'm just clicked the reference tab of my chess-based light, and we'll see its relative popularity. Okay, in my reference database, the most popular move is bishop g5 with about 25,000 games. Bishop e2 is another popular move. Bishop e3, bishop c4, fourth popular, about 15,000 games. f4, f3, a4, g3. Then h3 is there with about 1736 games. Carlsen has played this move before, as well as Karakin, Daryov. So it has been played before, h3. So we'll go into the game. And now the most common move is actually e6 here, or e5. In fact, that was played. Knight retreating is the most common move to e2, not to b3, with 332 games. And now this move h5 is a kind of rare bird. The most usual move is bishop e6 here. H5 is a much rarer move. Bishop e7, 101 games. b5, 74 games. h5, just 28 games. Believe it or not, though, some powerful exponents of that 28 games here. Anand, Gelfand, Arishenko. So Anand and Gelfand, both apparently played h5 here. Very interesting. So bishop g5 is the most common move here, 15 games. Valejo Pons, Naidish, Sutovsky have played bishop g5 before. With 11 games there's g3. So bishop g5. Then we see bishop e7. No, we see bishop e6. Now bishop e6 in the game is the most is one of the most common. Bishop e7 slightly more on my database. They're about the same really. But we're in 8 and 6 here. We're out of most of opening theory. And in this position, f4 has been played a couple of times before. Knight e2 to g3 and g3, one game with bishop f6 played by Naidish before. So there's a Naidish against Anand game here, which Anand actually won. That was played in 2009, and so I wonder if some sort of reverse psychology is being used here, that Naka is playing a line which he knows that Anand played. So it did continue like this other game in 2009, with in this position the move c3 being played by Naidish, but we see knight e2 to c3 being played now by Anand. So Anand against Anand, he'd rather play knight e2 rather than what Naidish played against Anand in 2009. So okay, so the first departure, and it seems a logical move. Why not? So c3. Okay, so c3's been played before. Maybe I'll put that in the PGN of the game. That was that's interesting. c3. So okay, so knight d7, and we see bishop c4. So white's just controlling with pieces that d5 square. For the moment, a small advantage for white. Not a huge deal. even though you might think it's quite exotic for black to have played h5, white's reaction is quite forcing with bishop g5 without prompting the take on f6. So at the moment it seems roughly balanced. For engine view, it's about equal here. Bishop getting tucked on a2. You might think, well, bishop b3 might, if we look at bishop b3, what was the threat there? Is black actually threatening knight c5 or something? There's no big deal. Knight c5, you can put it on a2 anyway. It's not such a big deal. Okay, so it goes all the way back to a2. So white's got that grip here. I assume queen a5 is not possible here. It's a blunder. Yeah, check, and then bishop e6, just attacking the queen. But after king g7, is the threat really queen a5? Not really. Okay, queen g5, queen h4. Okay, it's not really on the cards. But in any case, b4 was played. In any case, protecting the pawn. Okay, so we see rook c6, queen d3. Is white threatening b5 potentially? Not really, it's not a major thing coming up. So queen g5. Is black threatening anything concrete apart from queen d2? I thought queen d2 was the principal threat actually earlier. Might be, but rook f8 just doubling on the knight. Okay. Queen. Okay, rook c8 doubling on the knight. So black is enjoying a nice c file here, and a slightly unusual position where this b4. You wouldn't normally think this is a move against the Sicilian when black's blasting down the c file. So these rooks are working hard here, and these rooks, on the first row. But how can black exploit that c file? In fact, is black actually threatening now at least bishop d5? If given an extra move, bishop d5 would be a threat. Knight takes d5 and rook c2. Hence, that does help explain bishop b3, just adding some protection to c2 here against bishop d5. Okay, so we see f5, which actually the engine doesn't like, but it's an active, aggressive plan nevertheless. Okay, it slightly weakens black's position tactically, I guess. It gives this loose piece tactically. It is highly controversial actually. I remember when playing Sveshnikov and you play a move like f5, this is often the subject of tactics on this diagonal, but with the king on g7, it's more justifiable to play it here. But we see this evaluation shift as though it is a risky move. E takes. Now, if queen takes, I think that's unplayable. Maybe we just take the queen and play knight e7, or even knight e7 straight away. Of course, knight e7 straight away, not queen f5. That's no good. Black just because there's rook takes c3. But in this position, knight e7 straight away, and then if queen d3, we play rook takes d3, protecting c3 for a moment. Or is it what's actually going on here? If rook takes c3, knight takes c8, this bishop still hanging here. Rook takes d3, bishop takes e6, and now there's two pieces attacked. So white ends up a piece up after all that. So possibly, yeah, it seems as though after e takes f5, queen f5 doesn't seem possible here because of knight e7 tactically. So either gf or bishop f5. gf is chosen. Okay, and then we see in the game we saw knight e2, which is a seemingly very attractive move. There is actually a post-mortem video, and people were mentioning f4 as a possibility as well. And Vishy had rejected this because of the e5 knight possibility a knight coming to e5, and both players thought this is no big deal. Even with this tactical idea now in this position, knight d takes f4, threatening knight e6, it shouldn't be a particularly big deal. I think maybe just taking, and then they said about moving the queen. Both players thought this was no big deal, not the end of the world. If there's a positional knight on e5, I think that's going to be a source basically of counterplay reduction, to have this monster knight on e5. So that's undesirable. I think it's undesirable for white to do that. Okay, so knight e2 instead of f4. Any other possibilities? I think it was mentioned by Naka that he was a bit concerned here about b5. Let's have a quick look at b5 as well. Knight c5, and the queen, let's say the queen drops back. Is this a big deal, this position? Maybe not. It's, again, this is an aggressive knight here. It seems intuitively anyway. An exchange sack? What's going on here? For f2, demonstrating the knight's quite aggressive. So this seems to be counterplay for black anyway. A very aggressive position. With this move, this knight is kept out of both c5 and e5 basically. Those other moves give the knight some activity. So white's keeping an advantage here, it seems, and I think the threat is now f4 in this position. Yes, so f4, it seems to be a big threat in this position, and also bishop a4 is another potential threat, because the knight is stopping rook c7, so that is dangerous as well. It's not just that actually. I think there's the possibility of taking a knight b6, forking if the rook has to come to c4. So there is actually bishop a4, but f4 is also seemingly a strong threat to deal with. I think maybe take knight d4, forking rook and bishop is nasty. Otherwise, if the queen drops back, then knight e3 apparently, and that starts to get nasty for f5. Okay, so that's what has to be dealt with perhaps here. So black stops that completely by playing f4 himself, and Vishy's move now is very tactical, when in fact he could have maybe, there's another interesting move just to go back here, exploiting the e4 square. So say bishop f5, different game, but that seems to be a comfortable battery here. Surely black's not doing too badly in this position. It seems a comfortable position. Not too bad. Not too bad. Okay. And it's, I don't know. Although I don't know, winning this b7 pawn, is that really is that giving white something? Possibly, but okay. So in the game, after f4, we see the very tactical knight d takes f4, and this is a forcing sequence now, which is seems technically to be losing some of white's advantage. So maybe the quiet move was worth considering. So we see this forcing sequence. Bishop takes b3. Another move h4. The queen can't go back anywhere else, I think, apart from g4 here. There's no time for bishop c2 because we're taking on h6 with check. So that's just winning material. Okay, piece up. So in this position, if the queen moves to f6, that's a disaster to knight h5 check. If it moves to e7, that's a disaster to queen g6 check. So basically queen g4 seems virtually forced, and f3 seems virtually forced, believe it or not. The ugly looking move f3 is absolutely virtually forced here. There's no other move that apparently okay, it's possible. So bishop c2 So we're in this forcing sequence, getting this position. Knight takes h5, where white, well, it's apparently just technically about equal. There's a question asked in the postmortem about king g6, and interestingly, Naka mentioned that his rooks would be passive if he has to play bishop f8. This is he called this virtually a lost position because of the activity, the low activity of the rooks. Now, did he actually mean, in particular, that an exchange sack might be possible on d6 as well? If this rook, so say we try moving this rook, an exchange sack, yes, might be possible here, just to win d7. In fact, this is winning d7 with check, so that's a big problem. So we'll make it an exchange sack, and that's totally unpleasant. White's got two pass pawns on both sides of the board, so I think that is a justification for his comment about the rooks being passive and it's being virtually lost. If White's really threatening not just pressure on d6 but an exchange sack here all the time, so this rook can't really move here. This king doesn't want to be there, so it moved out of the way instead, quite wisely, to g8. That's the lesser evil move, king g8 here. Okay, and then we saw rook d3 and bishop f8. This is a logical sequence now. Now king h2 seems fairly logical to get the king aggressive for the endgame. It's not mentioned by the engine. I think the engine really thinks maybe rook c4 can be dealt with. I think that's the principal threat here for black, is rook c4 to win back some material. And with this next move, the idea is to sack, the engine's idea is to sack h4. Let's have a quick look at this. So if g5, rook c4, let's sack h4, and what is actually going on here? g6. Let's entertain this. It doesn't seem as though it's that great for white compared to Vishy's continuation. If he's losing both pawns like this especially, but mind you, d6 is under fire, but this big knight on e5 again, it's nothing to write home with this position, it seems. I think black's got adequate play. So in the game, Vishy decided to get his king quite aggressive, quite ingenious really, just to get the king to h3 here, offering b4. But the engine doesn't like this. Okay, but on the other hand, these pawns are looking dangerous over here, and we see also now the evaluation shift is coming down because there's another important property here to do with rook f3, and it's to do with this knight being able to potentially go to f6 with the rooks doubling. And there's a startling, what I found it an absolutely startling possibility in this position of the rook c2, that Vishy moved this knight, but in fact technically the move rook a f1, offering the knight on e2, believe it or not, in this position offers a bit of magic, and you might not believe this at all. What on earth would this be about, rook a f1? Well, let's see. If rook a f1, rook takes e2, Vishy had calculated a line like this, which started off, I think, a bit like this, check, and rook bb2, where white is now, you see, if the knight moved, then that was dropping to rook f8. Now if in this position, where white's now threatening check and then mate, black has to go in for this and rely on a lot of checks. e4 check, and in this position, you know, Vishy had seen all of this and kind of rejected it, and now with rook takes h4, defending against, believe it or not, that threat of mate. There's no threat of mate now because the rook's defending h7. Vishy had seen all of this and should have gone in for it, and admitted to fluffing things up really by not going into this, because this should still be better for white. And he's absolutely right here. He had assumed something intuitively, I think, like getting the rook in, but let's have a look. I think it also mentioned the king to g5 as well, but check, king g5. Now in this position, there's even no need to get the rook in. Knight e4 threatens rook takes f8. Let's go with check here. King f5. Bishop goes back, say. King e6. Check. King d5. Let's go with this. Bishop g7. White seems to be a lot better here. It's a +3. We're talking about +3. So I think Vishy kind of realised, I think, that he should have perhaps gone for this continuation. It's looking really good. Now there's the threat of knight f7. Let's go with this. There's king walking about is unusual, but this kind of thing is great if this is really going to win the exchange. What else does black do here though? If black played, I don't know, a rook move, for example, then okay, a mate in it's forced mate. So this would be real trouble. This whole continuation. So it's funny that there is this very strong tactical move in this game, which I found personally very magical, behind the scenes move that was partially calculated by Vishy though. But he ended up playing knight c3, and I guess he thought that this was going to be good, really. So e4, and then basically to sort of take off these centre pawns. This opportunity here to take off the centre pawns. Knight f4. Okay, so we see now rook coming to protect d5, and okay, so taking giving up 2 knights for a rook and those 2 centre pawns seems an attractive concept in principle, because white is still left with these 2 dangerous pawns here. So will the bishop and knight really be able to coordinate? Okay, so let's go with rook takes a5. Engine point of view, it's about equal. Now after rook a3, that's given technically as a total blunder, and I think Vishy had also recognised bishop a3 would have been dangerous here, but it really needs precision follow-up, of course. Let's have a look at rook takes a3. It wasn't played in the game. We see rook e8, but if rook takes a3 had been played, okay, let's go. What's happening here? Forget king g4. I think they mentioned, this is the line that they mentioned, king g4. Let's go over that. b5, which might not be the best move though. King f5, just walking the king. It's human continuation. Which might not be that accurate. Okay, it was just analysis of the game, but black's getting overloaded here. The pawns are not really being that heroic for black, but from the engine point of view, let's go with this. Check. Okay, so h5, king f7, rook a8. Okay, I think these pawns are just too dangerous intuitively. That rook a8 is clever. The pawns just look overwhelming here. So I think Naka had said he thought it might have been worse in the ending and then better, etc. There was a lot of swings in this game. So it seems that rook a3, yeah. It's interesting that rook takes a3 might actually be good, but rook e8 gives black the opportunity to take on g3, and you might think, well, what's really the big deal difference for this position? I mean, because it looks as though, well, the bishop's just pinned here. Isn't that better than the bishop being on a3? Well, actually, it turns out that maybe the bishop's actually better on f8, and now, you know, something like rook a8 before, does that actually work as well here? Let's go with this. So the knight's cutting out b6, the bishop's cutting out a3. Yeah, maybe it still looks pretty grim actually for black, this position. So that's interesting as well. So how did it happen that okay, in the game we saw the pawns being very dangerous, and the accurate move, okay, rook d8, okay, so we see knight c5, and Vishy again played it seemingly, well, fairly accurate move, rook b8. Then we saw king f7, and here we saw the move g6, which looks absolutely tempting and is not mentioned here. G6 is not mentioned at all. I wonder if g6 is actually a kind of lucrative blunder to be played. Tartakower once wrote, blunders are waiting there to be played. So why would g6 be some sort of blunder? I wonder. Why king g4 here? I think both players had looked at king g4. Let's have a quick look at king g4. Okay, attacking the rook. Well, h5 here or g6. I think h5 might be better. And what's the idea? But even in their continuation, black's slightly, I think, overloaded here. Starts to get overloaded. The knight and bishop are not coping that well here, because white's got this plan of h7 coming up, so the knight's not really holding up g8. So yeah, white can really crash through a lot in a lot of these scenarios on the king side here. But g6 might not be doing it somehow. Okay, let's see what happened. We saw king g7. I think there's a dark square blockade. If we contrast there, this h pawn really wants to sort of go without any blockade. So I think that's a key thing here in what we just saw. That if we look at this h pawn, it's not being stopped from going to h6. In fact, if the king's really coming out there, especially, what does black do if the king tries to stay around? Well, no, the king has to protect d7 anyway. So yeah, it's getting too dangerous over here. So let's go back. So king, after g6 check, the king's got to protect f8. King g4, b4. Now perhaps white could have. Okay, and all of a sudden we see an equals. Yeah, I think this dark square blockade makes one think that g6 might have been a little bit of a blunder, but white can still apparently have an advantage with taking here. But it seems a bit tragic to lose the two connected pass pawns. But mind you, there's another two here potentially. So this doesn't look too bad either. So say this continuation where this other one's going to come up. So yeah, and black's lost his important connected pass pawn. Tragedy on both sides of the board there, but white's probably got the advantage here. So let's go back. So we see h5, and all of a sudden there's an equality being generated with b3. So why is this? Is the knight keeping the king out of g5 because of knight e4 check? So we see, well, king g5, there's also bishop e7 check as well. So this dark square blockade is evident. We see king f5, and now all of a sudden, after bishop d6, the bishop and knight actually coordinate together for these pawns. and the rook actually hasn't got too many squares. If it goes to b6 here, and this was looked at by both of the players as well in post-mortem, if it goes to b6, black might actually be doing very well now. So he's got the dark square blockade on h6, very critical. We go with this, and if rook c6, interestingly, I mean this looks terrible, but interestingly, well, this pawn is really dangerous now, and apparently black's got two killer moves now, either bishop a5 or bishop d8. So let's, for example, bishop a5. If we take, I think, just b2 here. The idea is just to stop any rook c7s, I think. And this looks lost. This looks lost for white. So I think black was better here. In this variation. What variation was that? So after b4. Okay, so the move h5. Okay, okay, b3 was played. So king f5. And black's better after king f5. It seems that might have been a little bit of a blunder. Okay, so bishop d6, we see rook b4, and now this move which the engine really likes, a5, but no, bishop g3 as well. What? Bishop g3. a5 is also what is going on with bishop g3? Let's just examine this for a moment. So say king g5. Oh, there's some tactics now. Bishop f4 check. So what is going on here? If it takes, there's knight e6 check, I guess. Then just taking and then queening here. That's gaining a valuable tempo then. Over king f5. Bishop d2. And the knight's doing a good job of keeping the rook out of b7. Bishop c3. b2, and this is winning for black. So that's interesting. That maybe after this rook b4, maybe bishop g3 is a technical move of interest. Seems to be. Bishop g3. Interesting. And if black's given another move here, what is black actually threatening? Bishop e1, bishop c3. That's the idea. Okay, so a5 maybe not as hot, interestingly. So we see rook b6, which is technically a blunder again, a terrible blunder in fact, technically. I think, you know, this is round 8. I expect, to be honest, you know, grandmasters are humans as well. They're probably quite knackered by this part of the tournament. They're exhausted, so blunders are creeping in, and I think, although there did seem to be a lot of swings and blunders in this game, it's really complex and entertaining at the same time. So credit to both players for playing such entertaining chess. Let it be said, even just now. So okay, rook b6 seems to be a huge blunder because of a4. Okay, I mean, but that's actually the game continuation. So it's not really like this game continuation at all. White apparently. Let's go with rook h4. Why would this be equal? Check. Rook h1. check, g4. It's reaching critical proportions for both sides, but with an equals coming up for some reason. Queen, check, king takes g5, king h6, rook f1 with perpetual checks. Okay, so in the game, yeah, rook h4 wasn't played. Rook b6, which seems to offer black winning position. So a4, okay, rook takes d6. These pawns seem to be just winning from an engine point of view, or are they? Is b2 actually a major slip up? This is very interesting now. b2 appears to be a major slip up here instead of a3. Why would a3 be a lot more powerful than b2? Let's go with a3. What on earth is the difference now? So rook c6, b2, check, check. Isn't this getting dangerous with G? There's always check here. It's going to be check there. So it's keeping an eye on b1, but now a2 here and queening here. Okay, and black should be better with the extra queen there, even though the pawns are very dangerous. But in the game, why is b2 a kind of slip up? So we see rook b6, and this is the game continuation now. So it's as though b2 was a slip up. King g5, and it looks as though, okay, although h6 is threatened, black can get the king away from there with check. And this is the game continuation here. A really amusing bit of the post-mortem analysis on video. Vishy said about doing a Gary with king f4. He was going to change his mind about it. It was a silly move for some reason to play king f5, but then it turned out that king f4 was really okay anyway. Anyway, I thought that was amusing. So anyway, he had to be there. So king f4, and after a2, so rook b7 check, or rook takes b2. In the game we saw rook b7 check, and Vishy thought there was no real. I don't think he thought there was any real difference between taking on b2 or playing the check. Well, that might be an improvement. I assumed he thought rook b7 check was an improvement, but it seems to be even worse than just taking on b2 straight off the bat. And we get this like if we do take on b2 straight off the bat, you might think, well, isn't this hopeless? But the thing is about this is if the advantage isn't going up, then it might be some sort of fortress here. This might be a fortress position. This position here. If the rook's immune to capture, then white might not be able to make progress, even though technically has the material advantage. So that's the thing to really watch out for, which is instructive here about this sort of endgame. Actually, I think in the previous analysis, prepared analysis, also looked at this rook takes b2 line here, where this would be a fortress draw as well, and that's more clear cut. Look at the advantage there; it's much more clear cut. It's been about 0 because so these fortress draw positions are really quite interesting and staggering in some respects. And in the game continuation, it seems as though we're heading for another sort of fortress draw position. And with the game continuation queen e1, we did see a kind of virtual fortress draw position where the checks are not really leading anywhere. It's kind of an infinite loop of checks without the advantage going up at all. but the evil engines find something really quite staggering in this position at move 57 here for black, that in fact queen a4 check, and you might not believe this, but this had been calculated by Naka as well, in conjunction with queen d7 in this position, queen d7, which threatens queen c7, but Naka had seen basically I think the outlines of this infinite loop line here, where again it seems the rook is scurrying around without being captured. So for example, like this, that the rook is sort of immune to being captured, and it might actually, although that seems difficult to believe in some respects, but this sort of position is going to be hard to win, and he kind of he rejected that. It's only queen and rook for pawn. You might think, well, that's winning, but okay, maybe he didn't see exactly that, but he wasn't that convinced by, believe it or not, queen a4 check and queen d7. But it turns out that there's a computer move here which is a total knockout punch in this position. Well, in fact, maybe even two moves will do, either queen c6 or queen a5. In fact, queen a6 as well. Okay, 3 moves. No, 2 moves. I think there's 2 moves which deliver a knockout punch in this position, at this depth anyway, and queen c6 is one of them, because, believe it or not, in this position the rook is lost. This is not staying on the board. The rook is not staying on the board. For example, what the evidence is, the rook's not staying on the board. Example, king f5, check, taking on g2, check, and once the king is forced on the dark square, we get a fork, because the rook's on a dark square. So like check, fork, end of game. That's it. So it seems after queen c6, staggeringly, nothing works. Let's try something else. Rook b1. Check. Where's the king going? Loses there on the light square. Where else can the king go? f5, take queen c2. King d5. We lose to queen d3. So the rook can't use b1. Can't use b2 because of queen c3 check. It's a problem-like move. Queen c6 in this position, but it just, how does white save the rook? If rook h8, let's try rook h8. Queen c3 check, winning the rook. Rook g8. Queen e6, winning the rook. There's actually no square on the board for the rook, it seems, to not be lost. It's a problem-like position. If rook b3, have we mentioned that? Queen e6 check, winning the rook. So there's nothing. I hope you're convinced. If rook, after this, the rook is actually lost. Incredibly. So if that had been seen, that the rook's lost, that's the key principle. On queen d7, it's not so clear. The rook's scurrying around. So Naka had seen queen d7, but the rook's scurrying around as though it's not going to be munched. So, and in the game, it was even easier for white than any continuation we've seen there after check. So this is a bit of a fluffing up the win. I think Vishy mentioned that, and Naka he assumed the win was fluffed up with this, because the king is going with the pawns now, staying on the light squares as well for the moment. With this, it's a fortress now, and they had a few more checks and agreed a draw, but it's a fortress position. So where do they agree a draw? About here. Okay. So very tense, exciting game there. Very entertaining. I assume more and more that title players are just humans too, and they have the same effects as us as humans. That we're going to get tired. It's the 8th round. They're both exhausted, they're both blundering, there are lots of ups and downs, but it's a highly entertaining game, nevertheless. Very entertaining and interesting. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.